Welcome to the Coastal Athlete Program, presented by Apex Predator Athletics. Train today, survive tomorrow. Now, live from the shores of Monterey Bay, here's your host, Shep.
Welcome back to the Coastal Athlete Program. I am your host, Shep. Today, I am joined by OMNA official, the actual official OMNA person himself. We haven't even had a chance to introduce ourselves yet. We wanted to do as much of this on the air as possible. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience real quick?
My name's Carson Henderson. I'm the founder, CEO of OMNA Inc. We specialize in maritime tourniquets with some of them are integrated directly into surfing and paddleboard leashes. So we've got kind of a niche that we are working on.
So just to give everybody a little bit of background here, those who listen to the show regularly know that I've been surfing with a tourniquet for the last 4 years. I've, however, not been surfing with a maritime-specific tourniquet. I've been kind of adapting the equipment that I have, which leads me to use pieces of... Look, tourniquets, in my opinion, are the most important life-saving piece of equipment that you could carry on you. It's one of the lowest profile things you can carry. You can improvise them in a pinch, but there's no substitute for a nice wide surface area. What motivated you to create this product, and how did you realize that there would be such a need for it in the surfing communities as well?
Well, I mean, my background, I grew up surfing, as a kid and teenager in Cocoa Beach, Florida. And then I ended up serving in the Marine Corps. I was a recon Marine. And then I did a lot of contracting outside of that. But in between rotation, I took a surf trip to Costa Rica. And so I was crashing at hostels, surfing all day. And one day, me and some of the guys there took a boat across this river mouth, which wasn't huge or anything, but, pay $1, get across, not have to paddle it, sure. So we surfed all night, and then we got out at dusk. I mean, it's dark, there's not a lot of ambient light out there. But there are a lot of crocodiles. So we got back to that river mouth, and no boats were there, so we had to paddle that. So we got in a tight group, and we just paddled as fast as we could, and nothing happened. But that made me think. It's like, I always have a tourniquet at work. It's 2 hours to a trauma center. How do I put this in a leash? And so I actually built the first prototype in my team house in Northern Iraq, and it started off. So that's kind of where it started, and then we've gone through a lot of different evolutions and prototypes to get it to where it is now.
It's really cool because, one thing that I didn't know until just now is how aligned our company models are, because CAP seeks to take that battlefield deployed military level training experience and adapt it to a civilian population. And it's interesting because in austere conditions, whether you're serving in a medical capacity on a ship that's in the middle of nowhere, or you're in the Kush, or you're in Iraq or something like that, arterial bleeds are pretty much one of the fastest ways to die. And yet, as you have pointed out a few times on social media, the people who are surfing, like in Santa Cruz this past weekend, there were thousands of people in a 1 mile stretch of water. That's thousands of little blades around. So when you take that life or death level that you require for the battlefield and apply it to a civilian product, that's really exciting, because it sounds like you are like us at CAP. You have very low tolerance for gear failing in the field.
Right. Well, the whole design process, it's exhausting because, design history files, FDA regulations, TGA for Australia, CE marks for EU. You've got to do a lot of stuff and a lot of testing. So, you've got inputs, and you have to have a process, and then have outputs. And then you have to verify those outputs. And if you can't verify, you got to validate. So there's this whole continuum in records and that and safety factor. And one thing I was looking at for our second generation was the webbing. So what's the break strength initially? What is it when it gets wet? What is it towards the end of the product life cycle? Trying to make sure that it's going to exceed what we need or what somebody will need, so there's a lot to it. And coincidentally, my Costa Rica experience, 6 months later, a guy lost his leg to a crocodile there. So, which, I mean, sharks and crocodiles, that's like, that's 6% of surfing injuries, according to the author of Surf Survival. But still, it's the terrifying one that everybody's kind of scared of. I mean, it's mostly your own surfboard's going to be 55% of your injuries. So...
Yeah, and one thing that we are constantly kind of reinforcing with the athletes that we work with in class or the ones that we work with remotely is that more often than not, the stuff that you want to play in, that you want to train in, that you want to ride, those tend to, the bigger and more challenging it is, the fewer safeties are usually in place. The more it kind of falls upon you to execute a self-rescue or in some way like dictate the terms of how everything's going to go. And we have that great expression in the military, prepared, not scared. That's also funny that you're from the recon community. I didn't realize that going in. I actually guessed that you were in the Air Force because I'm surprised. Were you a corpsman or were you in the Marine Corps?
No, I was in the Marine Corps. I started off at 2.6. This was like 2000 to 2002. Then I went over to... took the recon indoc, went over to 2nd Recon Battalion, did the rest of the 2 years there, and then I got out from there and just worked for some of the security contractors. Yeah,
the reason I had said that was because I don't know if you've gotten a chance to listen to the podcast, but Joe, one of my good friends, one of the co-hosts of the show, is a former corpsman. And, we had George Briones on recently, who was in the recon, Marines. My mentor, Master Chief Rich, was on. We've had all these Navy people, and just now I'm realizing we haven't had any Army, Air Force, or Space Force people on. So I have to be more proactive about booking people outside of our network. But I guess what I was trying to get at was that one thing that I'm always fascinated by is when somebody whose job is not necessarily 100% medical response becomes so interested and passionate about being a medical responder. What was it that attracted you to this specific asset of what you do now? Like how did you go from being a Marine to being, have that corpsman mentality?
Right. I mean, well, you end up doing, combat lifesaver and TCCC courses a million times. It gets kind of ingrained in your mind there. But I was always interested in all the emergency medicine stuff and the tactical military stuff. And then, I surfed and dove and, so this is kind of like meshed everything together, and I've been able to, create some good products because of it. So it's interesting how it's turned out. I would have never thought it was going to be where it is now, or my life would be right here, right now, but it's worked. So
I mean, I can totally relate to that because, I was a rescue swimmer and on the VBSS team, but in the Navy, I had a conventional day job, and that job was logistics. And people would say, like, it seems like you're awful invested in TCCC for a logistics specialist. It's like, look, I mean, I'm a rescue swimmer first, and my passion for water rescue has kind of led me towards also creating a small business, or I don't want to call your business a small business, but a veteran-owned business in today's world. So, all right, just checking. So I have to ask, have you ever seen an arterial bleed in the water in person? Have you ever had an actual incident where somebody got cut up?
I haven't, but I get a lot of stories from different people. Like I was just in Australia the last couple of weeks, and I met with this guy Alex, who was one of the shark attack victims. I don't even want to say victim, but he got bit by a shark. Yeah. So he had a encounter, and he got bit. So and this is off Margaret River. So it was him, and then someone else went out like an hour later and got bit, too. So the World Surf League had canceled the whole competition there, which I guess they ended up finishing in Bali. But yeah, talking to him, I didn't really, get into a lot of detail, but we were mostly going over product. But tons of people tell me, most often it's someone saying, yeah, I was surfing and I wiped out and my fin sliced me open.
My own gear, yeah. Well, now, a lot of people who listen to our show are body surfers and bodyboarders like Joe and myself, or ride alternative surfcraft. And I've tried to explain to people it's very different for me to go out in a busy break than it is for anyone else who's standing up, because no matter what, like my legs are just hanging out there exposed, or my back or my neck. And one thing that I teach people when they go through the class is how to roll to put your equipment between you and the fin. Better to have to replace a boogie board than potentially have, a slice on the face or something like that. So I've started to really push out to the kids or the people who participate in our class, your products. We have not talked about it a lot on the air because as soon as I found out about this, you and I were trying to get together. You're busy, you're traveling internationally, you're really pushing this product out to the masses. But now that we have a chance to have a captive audience, I want to ask you 3 very specific questions about the equipment that you produce. The first piece of equipment is, what makes a maritime tourniquet what are the demands of a maritime tourniquet, and what makes that unique to going online and just buying the fanciest tourniquet that I saw on a special operator on YouTube? Why do I need to understand the difference between maritime and non-maritime tourniquets?
Okay, well, I've got one of my Gen 2 tourniquets right here. So this is the Gen 2 amphibious tourniquet. So this is actually wearable. So you can actually have this around your ankle, your wrist, or just on your dive belt, whatever. You don't have to go spend another $40 for a pouch. This is already... But what makes this maritime, which is your question... So I know the guys up at MCD, Marine Combatant Diver School, I guess they've done some testing like internally, and they came to the conclusion that it was impossible to get a windlass bar tourniquet on a swimmer in distress. So initially, this was a windlass, it was collapsible, but it worked okay, but it still needed some work. And then just having a strap you wrapped didn't really work that well. And then, so this is maritime. Trying to explain. So if I get into the ratchet here, so the ratchet, this is the compression mechanism.
For those of you guys who are listening at home, we're going to actually this is the first episode that we're going to make available on YouTube. And it's really beneficial to be able to go and look at how these mechanisms work. But for those of you at home that aren't able to do that, the easiest way I would describe the ratchet is it looks like a binding ratchet from a snowboard almost, in terms of it has the ability to accept and release. Is that similar in design?
Right, except, the normal ratchets you'll see, they don't use stainless steel. So like this housing, the rivets, the springs, everything is stainless steel. So we don't cut any corners and, just have steel and powder coated or anything like that. So that's one of the maritime aspects. The same thing with the stitching. So right now the stitching, so this thread is PTFE. So that's basically Teflon coated thread. So it's basically UV and weatherproof. And then the webbing, so we've got a proprietary maritime webbing that's got a higher UV, how do I say it? It's better in UV and salt water. Yeah, because if you look at pretty much all the tourniquets out there, or the ones that are mostly widely seen, they're using a nylon. So nylon's good, but nylon absorbs water. So when it gets wet, it loses 20% of its strength. And then nylon stitching, I think at a year, loses about 55% of its break strength.
Just for those of you at home, that means that if you have a tourniquet that you've surfed with for 1 full year and it's standard nylon, you're at 50% of capacity, or as I'd like to think of it, 200% of the chance of it failing you in the field.
Right. Have you read any of the, there's been some studies of, I think it was 3-6 when they came back from Afghanistan. It may have been 2014, but they had one of those standard military issued windlass tourniquets. And so out of the packaging, that type of tourniquet, I think it had, according to the study, had a 91% effectiveness. So that's in the plastic. But the ones they had out in their kit, when they went back and tested them, only 57% worked. So, you're going to get what you pay for. Everything here is designed to help you in and out of the water and resist the deterioration. Look, we've even added this non-slip neoprene, so when you're applying it, instead of just having that regular Lycra, it kind of grips your skin, not in like a pinching way. Yeah, so it's hydrophobic. So if you're going to be in the water, you're going to be wet, or you'll have some blood if you're using this.
The thing that I'm really noticing as I'm watching him work with this equipment through the camera, and as a SAR swimmer, is this, that it looks like it's wide enough that you can have more gross motor skill and less fine motor skill. And I'm really strong on that because I always carried extra tourniquets on my harness whenever I got out into the water. And one of my biggest beefs was I would pre-lace my tourniquet in the event that I needed to use it, because I didn't want to have to be trying to, with gloves in the water with somebody. If I'm putting a tourniquet on, there's an arterial bleed, they're probably not relaxed. They're probably screaming. They're not on a stable platform. They're bouncing up and down. And as I'm looking at what you have here, this looks like the perfect solution from a gross motor perspective to take as much pressure off of the swimmer in terms of getting the tourniquet and focus all the pressure in terms of placing it in the appropriate place to reduce bleeding at that time. So that's really cool.
It's fast and it's more conducive to gross motor skills. So this pulls right through, and then you're Velcroing, and then it's a lot easier to just lift this.
Yeah, it sounds like a snowboard binding. That's cool.
On the regular size ones, all the webbing is 2 inches wide. So this isn't, like the standard military tourniquet that's got the twisting bar. That's really only 1 inch wide. And so wider means the wider a tourniquet is, the less compression you need. So, I think the surgical tourniquets, they go all the way up to like 6 inches, but that's in a controlled setting. So, from being in the military, if you got to carry this, what's it weigh? Because you got all these other things. So we have, so the amphib one you can wear. That's the cool thing. And even the bite strap to help you when you're applying it with one hand. It just makes it so much easier. You can just
self-application looks like it's really straightforward and easy to do, and also like really intuitive, which is important, because whenever you transition from a very familiar form of emergency medical equipment to a new form, until you can make up that muscle memory difference in repetitions and opportunity, having something that seems very intuitive is clutch. I like what you mentioned about how you can transport it. So one issue that rescue swimmers in the fleet have is that tourniquets aren't necessarily a piece of equipment that's allocated by the nav admin to be stitched into your harness. So if you want to do that, you have to invest extra time or money or energy on your end to do it and find a place where it won't rub. We have a SAR swimmer who is based in Japan, who's a listener, and recently he was out training. You're going to love this, right? I love this as a SAR swimmer. He found some other crazy dude, and these guys go out once a week and they do life-saving drills in the dark in the surf zone in Japan. I'm like, that's dangerous, but I love it. That's what you need. He bought himself a brand new uber fancy tourniquet, probably cost him $75 online, put it on his harness, swam out there, went to go practice on the tourniquet with his partner. Tourniquet's gone. $75 wasted. The fact that you have a piece of equipment that doesn't require any additional modification to the harness or stuff like that, I think is important for the rescue swimmers in particular who are listening. You could, in theory, I could throw a couple of those on over my ankles and have them available in a pinch. That seems like a pretty damn perfect solution.
Or, you've got a wrist, you got a forearm, and then you've got a belt.
Oh yeah, it's
like
big
I said,
enough.
you don't have
potentially.
Yeah, and so this is so durable that it has very little wear and tear when you use it. So you can repetitively train with this.
And what he's talking about is the textured tongue groove that is going back and forth. Sorry, just for those guys who aren't able to get over to YouTube.
Yeah, so it's the ladder strap and ratchet system. But you can repetitively train with this, and you're gonna have very little wear and tear. So you don't have to go buy 2 other training ones. So that's I don't know. That almost seems like a marketing ploy for some companies. But my whole thing was to give people the best quality I could provide, because that could be me or one of my friends or family, and what would I want them to have? I want them to have the best thing, and I don't want them to have to break the bank either. So
Yeah, and you were ahead of the power curve because with the new instruction now, all naval medical training on ships is going to have to, on some level, fall within TCCC guidelines. You were ahead of the power curve. A couple of years ago when we first started Apex Predator Athletics, and recently when we started Coastal Athlete Program, a lot of people would say like they wouldn't understand why we'd be constantly drilling not only tourniquets, but improvised tourniquets. Because until we were aware of this product, I had somebody tell me once, you can't use a surfboard leash as a tourniquet. And I looked at him and said, if I'm bleeding out, I want you to use anything and everything you can possibly find. It's better than nothing to at least slow down the bleeding. And the fact that like every time you step on a board, you should have some kind of a leash. The fact that this can be integrated so that you don't have to think about it. It's not an increased like rub point or pain point if you're surfing and you fall on it. Like it just seems like a great solution to remove the greatest danger that you face out there, which is an arterial bleed.
Right. Well, I mean, if you get into we can get into improvised tourniquets. So the numbers I have, and actually I met with some of the guys at First Care Provider last week. And so the numbers they have is 84% failure rate. And the U.S. Army, their studies say 75. So I think they were telling me that they'd done an average. And so that's how they came up with 84%. So sometimes you can get occlusion with the surfboard leash, yeah, but it's not a tourniquet. There's a couple OEMs, which is an original equipment manufacturer, that makes surfboard leashes. That's where all these are coming from. They don't have a quality management system. This isn't us. People don't realize all the stuff that goes into it. Like you have to have these ISO certifications and quality control stuff, FDA registration. They're going to come in and audit your files. They're going to check everything. Like to make a medical device takes a lot because you have to scientifically prove that it's up to snuff. So, in a pinch, I got nothing else. Yeah, I'm gonna use whatever I have, even if it's a surfboard leash that's only 7 mil. So that's 7 mil diameter. That's less than a quarter of an inch.
So what I teach people for that one is I always teach them to take the wetsuit. If the wetsuit's torn, to tear a piece of wetsuit and try and put it over the vein to increase the surface area. Again, is this medically sound? Absolutely not. Yeah. But if you don't have a tourniquet with you, it's a hell of a lot better than doing nothing. And at the very least, it keeps you as well as the other person actively engaged and further away from going into shock. And that's kind of where I wanted to go next, which was the initial injury has been sustained. What do you recommend for surfers and other water people who spend their time in the water? What do you recommend for them to become more proficient in managing these types of injuries or issues should they happen? Because just stopping the bleeding is only half the battle. Now you still have to get yourself back to shore. You still need to contact help, things like that. What do you recommend for people to do that?
There's some different, there's different continuums and acronyms that people are using. I know that DHS's Stop the Bleed has theirs, First Care Provider has theirs, and then some of these I see some other companies, they develop all this stuff. So, and I'm sure March from the military. So,
but do you have one in particular that sticks out for you, your favorite?
March is kind of what I always kind of went to, and now I'm going to be working with some different nonprofits, and I think they have some that are pretty good. So like First Care Provider have some that's good. But I have to, looking at all that stuff.
Okay. I just didn't know if you had something.
Yeah. No, just, the straightforward March. So, that kind of sums up everything.
Before I let you go, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your story, because as I don't know how many episodes you've gotten to listen to, but I always extract a little pound of flesh from every guest that comes on, because to me it's only half about what you're doing. A big part of it is about how you have been changed by your choices and how you're improving yourself going forward. In other words, saying like those of us that come from a military background usually have different motivations behind what we do. For me, I love being at the ocean. I love teaching water rescue, and I feel that I need to find a way to effectively use all of my tools to have the biggest impact. And so I've started CAP and a few other programs. With like this company in particular, is there something that drives you on a daily basis? Like what makes you get out of bed and grind and not take a very safe job working for a big established medical response company, like a North American company that might have rescue in the title? What makes you choose to take the risk to be a small business owner and to push yourself like this?
I know. Well, I mean, my whole thing, I mean, it started as a surfboard leash, and because I wanted to change surfing. So a surfboard leash is a safety device, but if you look back to like the 70s when like Jack O'Neill and his sons were implementing that, they were left out of the water. And there were a lot of injuries too, because they were using like latex tubing. I mean, I think, yeah, he was surfing with like some latex tube, and he had the nose of his board hit his eye. That's why he lost an eye. But that was my thing, was to change surfing. And then as I got into it, I realized, well, if I take this part off, it's just a standalone wearable tourniquet. And I'm like, okay, well, that covers pretty much every other water sport and maritime thing. So that's what makes me get up and get out of bed, is that I just want to deliver a good product and do something good for people in the water. Because there's not really been anything specific. There's a lot of people that try to market things as being able to do everything, but there's no one that focused on this one area. And I mean, that's been my background and your background. You know, we've been on the ocean. I love surfing and diving and sailing and being out on a boat. And, you know, there's shit happens. So I wanted people to have tourniquets and, you know, we've got some surf first aid kits and stuff like that. And just, I mean, if one person's life gets saved, then, yeah, that's what it's all about. So it's not about making money over, you know, getting everybody's money and just being super rich. I mean, I wanted to give back and make a difference, and that's what makes me get out of bed every morning. So,
look, I mean, everybody knows this isn't a paid product placement. I didn't even know that you were a veteran when we set up this interview. This was 100% me seeing a product, believing in a product, being impressed with a product, and then having the opportunity to get the founder and creator, you know, to give me some of his personal time. So this isn't a paid advertisement for OMNA official or Surf Tourniquets at all. This is an endorsement from me as an individual and as an experienced water rescue professional. I think that the worst thing that I see within my community is this desire to get too cute and to get too showy with the way that you do things. And more often than not, there are people that are purchasing pieces of emergency medical response equipment online, specifically through Amazon, and they are using price point as their primary motivator and not recognizing that a life-saving device like a tourniquet cannot fail. It is exponentially more damaging, not only on a physical level, but on the mental state of both the rescuer and the rescuee, to have that piece of equipment fail. There's no capacity. And if it costs a few extra dollars to get something that's bulletproof and get something that is made of metal and not plastic, to get something that specifically takes into mind all of the structural degradation that can happen to materials and components over time, it's just a no-brainer that for you guys and girls listening at home to put some money out for this. And for the body surfers out there, I'm planning on ordering a Gen 2 for myself, and I'll be rocking that thing on my ankle, because after talking to you today, I'm realizing I haven't replaced my tourniquets in 2.5 years. So they're probably destined to fail anyway at this point.
And we have we have different variations. So you have the amphib, and then you have the mini amphibious. So the mini amphibious, that's more tailored for people, you know, smaller individuals. So like the ladies, maybe some of the grommets running around. So it's sized for them. And then we have a marine tourniquet that basically, it's not as much wearable, but it's got 4 fail safes. So the other ones have like 3, and this has 4. So just works a little different. But you can see all that stuff on the website. I mean,
yeah, what are you doing still listening to us? Get your ass online and order a couple of these things.